So do you know which city in Florida shares its name with an Australian state capital city? Well, if you guessed Melbourne, you're right. I get questions like, why is Melbourne named Melbourne? Or what building began the journey of the area into the city? Who actually founded the city? Well, these are good questions. I really wanted to do a video on this because we're in such a rich local historical area, and I thought it would be fun to do a video on its history. So stay tuned, because the answers to these questions and more are coming up next. Hey there everybody, I am Dana Weis here in gorgeous sunny Melbourne, Florida, brokered by Real Broker LLC. I'm not a historian, but I do love history. Love the History Channel. History's at the Museum, have you ever seen it? Oh, best show ever. Anyway, so after getting asked often, why is the city named Melbourne? Because apparently there are a lot of people who are going on there and Google searching Melbourne, but then they confuse it with Melbourne, Australia. Truth be told, Australia had the name first. We can't actually claim it. Interestingly, our area began to be called Melbourne 8 years before the town was actually even officially established. But why would it need a name if there was no town? That's a great question, right? And the answer is that a name was needed because a post office was being established to serve the families in the area. The first postmaster, his name was Cornthwaite John Hector, was an Englishman who had spent the majority of his life in Melbourne, Australia before coming here. And interestingly enough, although he generally gets credited with suggesting the Melbourne name, apparently it wasn't really him. It was suggested by, instead, a Mrs. R.W. Good, who was one of the settlers in the area. Now they say that Hector actually favored a different name. So although there are definitely more than one version of how the naming was accomplished, it appears that straws representing various names were actually drawn, and the name Melbourne was the lucky straw that was drawn. On the morning of December 22nd, 1888, a group of 23 qualified electors gathered to create the village of Melbourne by a spoken vote. So they just said it out loud, yes, we're the city of Melbourne, right? Which allowed the town to gain the benefits provided to towns under Florida law. So by evening, those pioneer settlers had elected their first officers and had settled on a corporate seal. It was a pineapple plant along with a crane and a palmetto tree. Now up to that time, the small community located on a natural harbor of the Indian River Lagoon had actually been named Crane Creek. We love our cranes down here. The name reflected the importance of the harbor, and it was formed where a freshwater creek flowed into the saltwater lagoon. Now at the time, barge traffic both north and south along the lagoon was just vital for the latest arrivals, right? How are you gonna get your Macy's order? Anyway, fascinating to me is that two neighboring communities were established where the freshwater tributaries flow into the Indian River Lagoon, which of course is where the settlers settled. And these two communities grew actually up kind of side by side into the two cities of Melbourne and Ogalley. The Indian River Lagoon was extremely important to early settlers. This fact is actually pointed out by a plaque in a small Melbourne park overlooking the Indian River Lagoon. The plaque reads, "To honor Peter Wright, early settler, a black freedman, the legendary sailing mailman who sailed regularly from Titusville to Malabar to deliver mail to riverside settlements. Peter Wright, like others who came after him, made his home in an area that provided easy access to a harbor as well as fertile soil." So in fact, Melbourne actually has a rich black history, and it is believed to have been founded by 3 former slaves who were freed as a result of the Civil War. One of our newspapers down here, right, one of our big ones, Florida Today, even did a great article on this in 2016 on their story. So they came to the Crane Creek area in 1867 to start afresh after being freed. Their 3 names are Peter Wright, Balaam Allen, and Wright brothers. Now, Captain Peter Wright was the first postal mailman, and he sailed regularly from Titusville to Malabar to deliver the mail, hence the plaque from earlier. He also became a fruit farmer in Rockledge and then operated a livery stable in Cocoa. So he's kind of all over the coast area. And Cocoa is actually where he's buried today. Now, Wright brothers grew citrus on their land, their family land, and they had the first black child born in Melbourne. How exciting is that? He has a park named after him. It's called Brothers Park, and it's located right here in Melbourne. And then finally, Balaam Allen, he established the Allen Chapel AME Church in 1885. But in 1964, a new church was built. It contains an impressive solid brass bell that weighs well over 1,000 pounds. And the church today is actually used for a lot of educational type of things, so that's really kind of cool. Now the river was the hub of commerce until 1892 when the railroad came into Ogalley and then made it into Melbourne in 1893. The first train reached Melbourne on July 3rd, 1893. And after that, it was the transportation route of choice over the river. I think that kind of happened everywhere with trains. So you can't talk about the history of Melbourne without mentioning what happened in 1969. The two communities of Melbourne and Ogalley voted to consolidate into the contemporary city of Melbourne. Now before that, however, Melbourne had ambitiously tried to get in the Atlantic, West Melbourne, Melbourne Beach, Melbourne Village, Palm Bay, and Palm Shores. So lots of different cities, right? To vote for a merging of all those cities and become one great big megacity. Now, why would they want to do this, you ask? Well, good question. Well, according to, again, Florida Today, the merging of the cities would actually reduce the costs for public services and make it one large megacity that would have had a voice in the state legislature. Now, this was important to some, but obviously not all, because the vote failed. They tried it again, but this time they were going city by city to get each city to say yes and adopt the vote. And this was in 1969. However, only Ogalley voted yes. Everybody else shot them down. The new Melbourne of today has two distinct old and renovated downtown areas. You've got historic downtown Melbourne, and then you have old Ogalley. Now, each of these areas has a nice variety of restaurants and shops to walk around in and patron. The Ogalley area became really what's known as now the Ogalley Arts District, and it has several galleries, a large public library that sits right on the water. It's so cool. One of the interesting buildings, however, that is still standing in Melbourne from the early days is the ice plant. It was originally a power generating plant that also produced ice, and it's actually on the National Register of Historic Places. But equally interesting to the ice plant is the Hennager Center, which is one of the oldest buildings in the Space Coast, and it was home to Melbourne's first high school. Now, I can't mention historic buildings in Melbourne without mentioning the Rossiter House Museum and Gardens, which is also on the National Register of Historic Places. The Rossiters were a prominent pioneering family who settled in Ogalley around 1902. Now, if you're interested in learning even more about the city's rich history, Melbourne's Historic Preservation Board offers lectures throughout the year. Now with COVID, they haven't really started them back up again, but I heard that they're going to be doing that soon. And I, for one, cannot wait for them to do that because I want to go to the next one and learn even more about it because I really do love history. I plan on going. So I hope to see you there. And I hope this helps someone today. Remember to make the wise choice if you're coming to the area or know anyone who is. We will see you next video.